Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome to the Thornton School of Music the recipient of 5 Academy Awards, 43 Oscar nominations, 17 Grammys, conductor with the Boston Pops for 13 years, and a much respected composer of concert hall music as well. Please help me welcome John Williams. That's working.
Good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you for coming. And I'm so happy to see John Burlingame here. I just said to John he will make it all very easy. He's not here, but I want to thank Dean Rob Gutietta for this invitation. It's wonderful to come to USC. I mean, I think, I was thinking driving down here, it's the center of such brain power that if you could probably get a nanosensor and go into outer space, you could probably focus where all this cranial compression exists on the planet right here at Jefferson, wherever it is. So it's quite a privilege to be here. And I'm excited about it. I hope I can say a few things that may be helpful or that might be responsive to some queries that you may have. Probably the best way to get at this really is to go into a Q&A and have you ask questions about what you think I might be able to bring some light to. But I thought, if I may, John, just take a minute or two or three to tell you a little bit about my background, to illustrate only probably the tremendous differences that exist between us, you as young professionals, and me as an aging one. And because you will be dealing with a lot of things that I'm unfamiliar with. And I'll just very quickly sketch my biography for you for that reason. It isn't that I'm particularly proud of it, but I just tell you that I left my parents' home to go to school and service and so on before there was a television set in the house. And we are all now addicts of visual stimulation. We stare at our computers and TV screens and movie screens and so on, and it's become, we are universally addicted to visual stimulation, which creates problems for the art of music, as we all know. And my beginning in music had to do with the piano. My father was an accomplished professional musician who was in the CBS Orchestra in New York and played out here in studio orchestras through a long and successful career. So I grew up with the mandatory piano lessons being given by good teachers. And I had the old Percy Getchus books who taught at Yale years ago, the composition counterpoint, particularly book in harmony, that I, as a kid, assiduously studied with in a nerd-like fashion, I suppose, in my teen years. I was very interested in orchestration because I used to go sit next to my father when he played in the CBS Orchestra as a kid, and I was fascinated by the orchestra, just sitting in the middle of it, watching the trumpets would enter here and the conductor would do this and something would happen over there before I could barely read a piano score. So I had great interest in orchestration to the extent that when I was a teenager, I could orchestrate just a little bit of reasonably well and write for band. And I attended LA City College, UCLA, 3 years in the service, went back to Juilliard School to study piano because my focus had nothing to do with film, which is part of the thing I'm trying to point out to you. When you think at all about composition, some about composition, nothing to do with film at all. I barely went to the movies, not very interested. And wanted to study with Rosina Lavinian, had the repertoire list and went and did an audition for her, was accepted, and I spent about 2 years in her company as a student, either in the Juilliard School in New York or out here at the old Los Angeles Conservatory in Figueroa, where she gave master classes for the summer. So by the time I was in my early 20s, I had quite a bit of experience arranging for bands, in this case military bands. And a lot of the hard work at the piano, and I needed a job at age 23 or 4. And there was a position in the Columbia Studios Orchestra for piano, and the principal requisite there was sight reading, and I was a good sight reader. And what I couldn't read, I could generally fill in a little bit. So I went to audition for Morris Stoloff, who was the music director of the studio at that time, And the audition was, he said, play something, and I played A Prelude and Fugue by Bob Van Apps, who was one of my teachers. He stopped me in about the middle of this and put something in front of me and said, can you read this? And it was a production part, the old production part, which is like a 4-line reduction of the full score that's still around. And I played whatever I played, and he said, you have the job. So it was a 52-week-a-year job as a member of the Columbia Pictures Orchestra, a very high-level orchestra. I had no orchestral experience as a pianist, but a pretty good sight reader. And so at that very tender age, I was sitting 4 days and sometimes 5 days a week because the volume of production in the studio was such that the orchestra was busy all the time, about maybe 40 plays, I think. The late Marshall Sassoon was concertmaster. We had some very distinct, Manny Klein was our principal trumpeter. Some wonderful, very well-remembered and very fine musicians in it. So before I had any interest in film music or any knowledge about it, really any interest, very little interest in it, I was sitting in the orchestra every day playing for Daniel Pietrov, the Bakalinnikov brothers, Mark Stoloff, Bernard Herrmann came in, Alfred Newman came in, so many people that George Dooning, I mentioned Herrmann, unforgettable in this case. So that I began to absorb by osmosis really at least the performance practices and the accepted conventions of what would have been done for those films in those years. And a natural consequence of all of this was that Morris Stoloff said to me one day, can you orchestrate this, it's on a Tuesday, can you orchestrate this 50 bars for Thursday? And with the temerity of youth, of course you can do it. And I said, yes, I'll do it. Did the best I could, apparently it was all right. So I began to write more and more, still as a member of the orchestra, orchestrations for people, the last minute pressure situations. Very briefly at the end of this. And after 2 years in that orchestra, I went to review productions at Universal as a composer of television films, and I had a 7-year contract there with Universal, which required me to do 39, around figure 40, 1-hour programs per year, which I did for 7 years. So that's approximately 250 or so TV films. And I did Alcoa Theater, Chrysler Theater, Kraft Theater, which were anthology programs. Very interesting. Meaning that 1 week I had to do an hour comedy, the next week I had to do an hour western, the next week an hour space opera, the next week an hour comedy. And I mean the next week, it may have 25 minutes of music and no orchestrator or no conductor. The requirements of the job would be that you had to write the music, orchestrate, and conduct it. And so that was a school like no other that anyone could have, and I sort of fell into this as a result of the piano. In my case, the introduction of all of this was instrumental. And I always say to people who are composers, if you can possibly play in an orchestra for a year or 2 or 3 or even a concert band, do it. Because as composers, you all agree, we learn a lot about what we do in the process of performing it. Very much so in conducting. In our program at Tango with our film composers, I've always asked them to write sequences for film and insist, if possible, that they conduct the orchestra also. Learn more at that moment than anywhere else, I believe. You all know the old joke from Robert Shaw, who used to say to his students, hey, we'll talk about our crimes later. About conducting, Robert Shaw would say, if God gave you the talent to compose, you should compose. If you can't compose, you should play or sing. If you can't play or sing, you should teach. If you can't teach, you should go into arts administration. And if you can't go into arts administration, you can always conduct. So if you have a good enough orchestra, I'd suggest that you always conduct, or at least try to conduct. So just a thumbnail sketch, and just to recap, I grew up without synthesizers and without computers. And I'd like to confess to you that I'm unreconstructed and antediluvian in the sense that I still use a pencil and paper. I wouldn't know how to use a Pro Tool. Embarrassing to say to you, because you've all grown up with a different technology, which has clearly produced a different and probably improved sensibility. Talk more about that later with your questions. But we certainly have, because of the decades that separate us, very, very different experiences and different preparation and different opportunity. I mean, my opportunities now in retrospect were great. The opportunity as a youngster playing for Bernard Herrmann in the orchestra, though he may be screaming at me, and composing an hour program each week that wasn't a step subject where I had to quickly make adjustments every week, was a good preparation to the opportunities that came later, i.e. feature films, for which I've done about 100, I guess. So I would underline, in my case, instrumentalism, performance, orchestration, conducting, and performance, again, life with the orchestra on the stage, going through the process of making music for TV and film, were my introductions and are still my points of reference to what I do. I love to hear, we'll hear more from all of you on the techniques that you use and the skills that you've got. And you're all at a very high level in your educational processes, and I congratulate you on all that. I know you all know more than I did at your age, and probably even more than I do now. But experience separates us, and if I can have any comments that might be helpful or remarks that might be interesting, I'd be happy to offer them. I just want to say one more thing, John, before we go, and that is to sort of stress a theme that I have in my mind. And I won't say that it comes from Bernard Herrmann, but Bernard Herrmann, he always resented the appellation film composer. He never liked to be called a film composer. You would say to a youngster, what kind of composer do you want to be? And the person would say, I want to be a film composer. You would say, well, that's the wrong answer. The right answer is you want to be a good composer. And a better answer still could have been, you may want to be a good film composer, if there is such a thing. Well, he was a good film composer. But one of my themes is, that's in a sense agreeing with him, is that when Bernard Herrmann came to Hollywood to do Citizen Kane, he knew nothing about film. When Alex North came here to do Streetcar Named Desire, he knew nothing about film. Leonard Bernstein came here to do On the Waterfront, he knew nothing about film. Aaron Copland came here to do Harrison, knew nothing about film. What they knew about was the art of music, theater. I think about Bernard Herrmann, who he really didn't know anything about film, in the sense that, at least in terms of cueing, I played for him for years, and he could never catch a cue. He would always be late or early. If the director complained, he'd just growl at them, and he'd say, well, can we cut the film? I'm not going to make sausages or Mother Taylor, and you could just play the music. He didn't understand film, but he understood the processes of West Point, or whatever they are. But he was a tremendous psychologist. He was an enormously literate person, in spite of this very gruff Brooklyn accent he had. He was extremely well read in English and in German. He started life writing for the Jewish Daily Forward in Yiddish, doing operatic reviews. He was a man of considerable intellectual importance. Understood human psychology, understood in film terms time and the spiraling vortex of all time that we're all caught up in, and in the mystery in human relationships, particularly in sexual relationships, which before Masterson Johnson was shrouded in mystery and long skirts. And that's what he understood. And he brought that in Mrs. Wheeler and Vertigo, and so he brought this sense of mystery about human relationships. He was a wonderful psychologist. I think in recent years, some of the most outstanding scores we've had come from people like Tam Dunn, for example, who do a wonderful thing with flying, and John Corigliano, who's done not a lot, but he comes with not any particular training in film, I don't think. So my theme is that it's about music, it's about the art of music, it's about performance,